I think my role in the renewing Latvian independence, and in that, we are often celebrated as as we who fought for Latvian independence, and that these people are the deputies who actually voted in the Supreme Soviet, in the Supreme Council, and actually passed the vote for independence. But passing a vote means quite simply sort of putting the checking the right box. I would say that the campaign was difficult, especially that my constituency was very difficult in eastern Latvia. So my first ambition was to graduate from high school and retire. For obvious reasons, it didn't happen. Well, literature for me is permeated with a sense of history. And sort of that's how I think of lives and literature. And there is some kind of an unwinding, or I don't know, but something that is not just happening, but it's having some kind of sense. And sort of my task is to make sense of my life, probably. Who's given me this task? I don't know. In a way, there was some kind of feeling that I'm following in my mother's steps, which my mother, by the way, did not support, because she didn't think that was a serious profession. She wanted me to be a biologist, and that was indeed my interest. I loved wildlife, and I liked plants. I had all kinds of cacti and other plants on my windows, and I was good at that. But I've never really viewed that as a profession. I knew it was a hobby. I still have that hobby. I still have cacti and other plants on my windowsill, wherever I live. In every country and in every apartment, I'd have something live. But still, I knew that literature and language would be my profession. And because my parents spoke different languages, my mother was speaking Latvian, and my father was speaking Russian, and sort of some of my relatives spoke Latvian as their first language, and some didn't speak any other language, and some spoke Russian only. I was brought up to see languages as different worlds, because I knew how different my relatives who were speaking different languages. Society thinks about itself in literature. One way, of course, would be all kinds of social sciences and polls and etc. But Poles very often lie. People lie when they're being asked. Especially Soviet people lie. Because whenever they are in somebody who they think is an official, they are likely to say what they think is expected of them rather than to say what they really think. Because of fear of the state, fear of officialdom, but in literature people did not lie. So I had thought of the Soviet Union as of 70 years of hypocrisy. Now I think that it's probably not true, but hypocrisy was probably the most characteristic feature of Brezhnev's times, the times when I was growing up and lived a good portion of my life. And at that time, especially in Latvia, it wasn't compulsory, or you were not forced to believe anything. What was important is what you were saying, especially publicly, and public, and what you were writing. And public saying and writing was included also what you were saying to foreigners, because that was that the system tried to control. But that was part of that hypocrisy that I accepted at that time. That sort of because the other position, which was that I had been thinking about also, was of complete, not only inwardly rejecting the system, but sort of rejecting it sort of officially in the open. But that meant that you are completely on the fringes of life as existed in the Soviet Union, that you couldn't get a job, and that's how we know many intellectuals and artists who became janitors or in the Soviet Union. I was not ready for that, so I had to go to the system, and that somehow that is in many ways a treaty, a contract with the devil. This is the worst. This is why I hate the Soviet system so much. And I'm one of the few people who recognize it and who understand it. There are lots of people who had lived in the system and who are not aware how it has destroyed them. Personality forming experience was this Prague Spring, and which was crushed by the Soviet Union. And I felt that as my personal defeat. I was 14 at that time. And then this perestroika time came, and I remember that, and perestroika came with like one impulse really, and I remember that impulse very well. I had a little apartment at that time. I was washing the floor at that moment, and suddenly the radio said, like, we will transmit now the thesis of the Central Committee plenum of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In the end, I had to sit down and sat and listened to the entire thing. The language was completely different. That language of official hypocrisy was no longer there. It was something else. It was completely just the language. The words were different. That is another another sort of example of how language and imagery is very important. They were not saying anything very new, but the the feel of it was completely different. It was clear that we are heading into new times. And then I got that offer of become the editor-in-chief of the Russian language edition of the newspaper of the Popular Front of Latvia. That was, I think, at the end was meant a lot for me. My my ambition was to have at least half of the Russians living or Russian speakers living in Latvia support the idea of independence.
Šodien vēsturiska datuma 13. janvārī mēs esam aicinājuši jūs šeit, lai vēlreiz apliecinātu sev un visai pasaulē, kas mēs esam, par ko mēs esam, kur mēs vēlamies iet.
And my feeling was that if we fail, I would hate if I felt that we failed because I haven't tried enough. We may still fail, but it shouldn't be because of my not trying hard enough. And I think I did that. Sorry.
осторожно просто, не надо прыгать. И везде могут быть камни.
Well, after, like, there is a point, and Adam Michnik said that when first you fight for freedom, and then the freedom fighters start fighting for power. And that's always an unpleasant time, and unavoidable, I think.